Today I'm going to show you how to install an internal handle and latch set that you can be proud of and give you a plethora of tips along the way. So something slightly different today. The project is to fit a couple of handles and a latch to a brand new internal door. However, I will be giving you as many tips as possible as I go along. So it'd be interesting to see by the end how many tips you haven't come across for what looks like a seemingly straightforward project. So let's start with tip number one, which is this door is obviously already hung. So unless you really need to, or if you're feeling really fit, don't bother taking it off and taking it to the workshop. This one is really heavy. So the best thing to do is actually do everything in situ. You'll find it a lot easier. But the thing moves about. So tip number two, to stop it moving, the first thing we need to use is a couple of wedges. Wedges like this are easy to cut from an off-cut of timber with a mitre saw or a circular saw, or just by hand if you don't own one. So I've read my instructions, I've got my tools, so let's just get on with it, shall we? Whoa, whoa, whoa. My next tip is probably the most important one out of this whole video. And that is, before you even touch your nice new £100 oak veneered door, let's go to the workshop and do a little bit of a trial and a little bit of a test. And it's worth doing a test for two reasons. Firstly, the instructions that came with these handles and lock set are incomplete. I assume these are written for various different size locks, so I haven't got all the information on here. And secondly, I'm going to be putting this lock into a £100 oak veneered door. So I'd rather spend 50 pence on a piece of 4x2 and 10 minutes of my time making sure that I've got all the right sizes and I know exactly what I'm doing before I touch the door, rather than just going straight for the door, making a mistake and regretting my decisions. So firstly, let's have a quick look at these instructions, and you'll see that there's a couple of pieces of important information missing. There's no mention of the size of the radius of where the door latch actually fits through the door. So I don't know at the moment what size hole I need to drill there. There's no distance between where the spindle goes through and the face of the door. There's no dimension for that. I assume that these instructions are for different size locks, so they just haven't put it on, but that's quite an important dimension. So firstly, let's have a look at what size hole I need to be able to get this latch mechanism fitted into the hole. And all I'm going to do is measure the diagonal on this, which comes to about 24 millimeters, and then just drill a couple of holes in my spare piece of wood and just see which one fits the best. Today I'm going to be using spade or flat bits rather than auger bits because they're cheaper and more common to the DIYer. Let's just put this latch in. So the first hole I've drilled is actually the right one. It's 24 millimeters. However, this latch has got these sort of wings coming out the side. You'll see it's a part of the mechanism, which actually stops it going into the hole there. And it's not as if I can cut these off. Obviously, they're a part of the mechanism. So there's a couple of things I can do. I can either drill a bigger hole, but the bigger the hole means the less material left in the door, and the bigger the chance this whole thing is sort of going to rattle around. The most secure latches like this just about fit in the hole. So I don't really want to just keep drilling a bigger hole. But what I could do is chisel a little bit out and just make these wings fit. So let me just try that and see how easy it is. So that definitely works, although I'm not down to depth yet, but definitely if I kept going, that would be one solution to that problem. However, I don't really like that solution. You see, the door that I'm working on upstairs is already hung. So to do a lot of deep hammering and chiseling that's going to really knock the heck out the door is not particularly good when I'm working against hinges. It's one thing about doing it on a solid workbench that's sitting on concrete. There's another thing about doing it horizontally against your hinges, so I'd rather not do that. However, I think there's another solution to it that's going to cause a lot less grief to the door, And the only reason I know that is because I've just done this trial and this test. So now I'm thinking about solutions just purely because I've done this test rather than trialing it on the proper door. So one solution I think I can use is by doing a bit more drilling. To mark out exactly where I need these holes, I lightly start my main hole, which tells me exactly where the wings are positioned, so I can drill 2 holes, hopefully taking out enough material to give them free movement. I can then drill out my main hole. And then finally just clean out any splinters that still exist with a chisel. I've just cleaned out the hole so the latch fits in properly, so it fits in full depth and it works nice and freely. That doesn't prove to me that it's in straight. It could be one way or the other, or in or out. That I'll show you how to get around when we do the real thing upstairs in a minute. But it does tell me that I can produce the right quality hole that's nice and clean with a 24mm spade bit, whatever size bit that is, and a chisel. So I'm confident about that. The next thing I want to do, just before we go and do the real thing, is just to double check the holes here and the dimensions, because at the moment I'm not inclined to believe anything on these instructions. I mark a line along the centre of the latch hole perpendicular to the face, and then put a mark where the spindle is going to come out, which I've measured to be 57.5mm from the face. To mark out the other required holes, here's another tip for you. Rather than starting your tape at 0, start it on an even number and then measure from that. It means that the wobbly bit at the end of the tape doesn't get in the way. So to be fair, the instructions on this were correct. Everything seems to be lining up, and that is absolutely worth 5 or 10 minutes in a workshop with a little bit of scrap wood before you start destroying your £100 door. And it just gives me the confidence. I know what I'm doing, and now I know exactly what size bits I'm going to need, and it's been a bit of a practice as well. Obviously, if you had to fit 5 of these in one day, then after the first one it's easy, but for us DIYs this might be the first time you're doing this for 5 years, so best to actually try it on something that you don't mind getting it wrong with. Right, let's go upstairs because there's lots of other tips that I need to tell you about how to fit all this in and make it look tidy. So we're back to where the action is going to happen, and the first thing we need to decide is where on the door this handle is going to go, how high from the floor it should be fitted. Now, this is one of those sort of questions that you could ask 3 carpenters and get 5 different answers, but there's a very simple way of working out where your handles should be fitted, and that is have a look at the other doors where you're living. There'll be other doors in your property. Just measure from the floor up to where the handle is and just copy that, because it doesn't really matter other than the fact that it should match with the rest of the property. Now, I do have to caveat that some hollow doors will maybe have a zone where you can only put the latch in a certain area. So you might be limited by a few inches one way or the other. But in a door like this, it doesn't really matter where it goes. So all I'm going to do is measure one of the other doors in this room from the ground, and that's where we're going to fix it. 990, that is near enough for me. 990. So you can see by the size of my spade bit that I need to use, I haven't got a lot on either side. So I definitely need to find the center point of this door so it gives me as much leeway as possible. So to do that, then I just measure the door. That's 35mm. 35 divided by 2 is 17.5. I'm just going to set this gauge to just under that. But this is a good little tip. What you can do is just mark the same from either side. And I know now that the centre of the door is halfway between those 2 lines. And because there's only 2 or 3mm between those lines, it's quite easy just to assess the centre, and you're not probably going to be more than a sort of 0.5 millimetre or less out. And the next tip is to do with these spade bits, because they're not that good of staying dead in line. You can actually end up with a sort of S-shape hole if you really tried. So to get around that, the best thing to do is actually to use a pilot hole, and we're using a drill bit here that's about half the diameter of that spiky bit on the end of the spade bit. And if we drill a straight hole with this, then the spade bit is going to follow. However, we still need to drill the pilot hole straight, else we're just going to follow the wrong angle. And when I drill a hole like this, to line it up left and right is easy for me because I'm sort of looking down the door. But to make sure it's horizontal is a lot more tricky unless you've got someone to help you. And this is where our block of wood comes in. So this is the next tip. That actually, all I need is a block of wood cut off at 90 degrees, put on there, and I can easily see, that gives me some sort of gauge of whether I'm horizontal or not. This tip really does help with holes like this one. Once the drill is running, you can actually feel through your left hand how it's rubbing against the block and whether it needs to be a bit higher or lower. I then use the same sequence I've just practiced in the workshop to drill out the rest of the hole, using the classic tip to drill to the right depth, which is a bit of insulation tape on the shaft. Let's have a try of that, shall we? Ooh, 57.5. 19 in this direction is here. Just realised there's a tip that I should have given you right at the beginning, all about buying your hardware. So when you're out buying your hardware, don't just find handles that look nice, but also have a look at the latches. And if you can, find latches that have got this hole between the spindle and the front plate and a bit of a notch at the back. That means that they accept through bolts. Now, if you don't know what through bolts are, go and have a look at this video where I explain all to you. And essentially, they're bolts that clamp the handles from either side. So they're not reliant on actually getting a good fixing into the timber. It doesn't even matter if there's no timber there at all. They all get clamped together. You'll see it in a minute, but first I need to drill some more holes. So that's essentially all the drilling complete. So what I do have to do now is to cut out a little bit on this face of this door so I can set both the latch plate and this other additional plate in so it's all nice and flush with the door. So I need to first of all scribe or cut all the way around the outside of this. At the moment it's a little bit wibbly wobbly. So there's two different ways you can do it. You can, if you're feeling confident, hold it in place, get a Stanley knife and cut exactly around that perimeter. The other thing you can do if it is moving about is that we can actually put some screws in now to clamp it in position, which is the way I'm going to do it. So I'm just going to pop a couple of screws in there and then that will fix that plate in position. So that leads me to my next tip, which is if you're going to tackle jobs like this, for a very small amount of money, invest in a set of self-centering drill bits. They've got heads that pull back on a spring when you push them in and they center themselves and then drill a really nice pilot hole, which means that all your screws are going to be exactly in the middle of whatever you're using this in. And they're not that expensive at all. I'll put an Amazon link in the description of where you can find these. Right, let's put a couple of screws into this plate. I'm going to pop a screw in there first. Just centers the top and nothing's going to move. What we need to do now is to cut all the way around there with a nice sharp Stanley knife. And the first few cuts want to be really, really gentle and nicely along that line. So we don't want to follow the grain at all and start going in a different direction. We want to just follow down the side of that plate. If you're interested, you can see another video I did a few years ago where I did something very similar to bigger latch. I'll put a link to it on the screen now. So now I've cut around the perimeter, I can take this out and take away some material. And there's two ways you can do this. If you've got a router, you can set a router to the right depth and actually route this out. That's definitely the easiest way. I will be doing it more manually today because a lot of people haven't got routers. It won't take 5 minutes anyway. The next big tip is, at this stage, only remove material from a couple of millimeters inside the perimeter. What that will do is protect the edge that you want to leave clean and undamaged. We're going to take that out later.
So we're not going to be far away from that now. So what I want to do is just take off that couple of millimeters that I left before. And what you'll find now is that it's such a thin strip that when we run our knife down it, it will just come away like that without any damage to the outside.
This is an iterative process, so you just need to keep trying this latch in the hole and removing small amounts of material until the whole thing fits. Once it does, a spindle can go in place, which means the handles on either side can then be fitted. And then I install the through bolts. If you want to see more details about through bolts, go and see this video that I made recently all about through bolts and why they're the best thing since sliced bread when it comes to fixing handles on doors.
So just another little tip, when you're cutting this out, if you go too deep, which is something that I've done many times, just get a thin piece of cardboard or playing cards that you don't want anymore, cut it out the same shape as this, put it behind the plate, and that will just pack it out depending on how much you put in until the plate comes nice and flush to the front face of the door, and no one will ever know because it's all going to be hidden behind that. Right, now let's put on the is it the latch plate? What's it called? Maybe it's a latch plate thing.
Strike plate, Stuart. It's a strike plate. You keep forgetting that. So on the opposite side of the door to the latch is always the strike plate. First of all, I mark where the top and bottom of the latch actually hits it, so I know exactly up and down where it is. And with a square, I can transfer that information onto the face that I'm fixing the strike plate to. And here's a classic tip to work out exactly where your strike plate needs to be positioned so your latch to fix into it. Mark the front face of your latch with a marker or lipstick. You can use lots of different materials, and then close the door, and you will find that that material, even if it's rather faint, will mark the timber, and then you know exactly where the strike plate to left and right needs to be set. And then go through the whole sequence again by cutting around the outside, removing the material in the middle, cleaning it out with the chisel. The only difference is on this side I've now got what's called a dust box, which I need to set in even deeper, which tidies the strike plate up nicely. And before I know it, the thing's installed and I can try the door.
That's nice. No movement there as well. Excellent.
I think that is looking pretty good, and I think that is a good job done. And just to bring up the number of tips up to an even 20, one thing I should have said right at the start is before you do anything, put down a dust sheet, because this does make quite a bit of sawdust. So before anyone inspects my handiwork, I've got a bit of clearing up to do. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you next time.